Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a gentleman, an author, to introduce you tonight who's got a really interesting book about real estate development and the Olympics in Vancouver, etc. Richard Littlemore is my guest. He's an author, and his new book is City Builders, the Malaks, the Olympics, and a Historic Gift to Vancouver. And you've argued in this book that really Vancouver was unfair to these gentlemen, and you almost compare it to Iran being unfair to them. Tell me a little bit about your story, if you could, please.
It is the comparison is interesting, and it isn't a comparison so much as a story of two governments that trashed these guys in a most dramatic way. The Malak family were originally from Iran. Their dad, Amir Malak, had started the biggest construction and development firm in that country, so in the post-war period. And at the time of the 1979 revolution, they wound up having to leave the country with what they could put in a suitcase. So they were wiped out. They left hundreds of millions of 1979 dollars worth of equity behind, and wound up coming to Canada. And they rebuilt, and they rebuilt fabulously. Vancouver and Metro Vancouver is dotted with really beautiful projects that they did over the years, such that by the early aughts, they were invited by the city of Vancouver to bid, to act as bidders on the Olympic Village project, the project to build a village for Olympic athletes. And they did that. They won the bid. They did a lovely job. The neighborhood today, Olympic Village today, is gorgeous and widely hailed as such. I mean, nobody complains about the work that they did, but they did it during the 2008. They wound up caught in the 2008 downturn. They went to the city for help. The city was unhelpful overall, and wound up pushing them into receivership. Pushing the project into receivership after it was already successful, after it was already done. And in doing so, they pushed them, they destroyed them. They didn't destroy the brothers. They made every attempt to. They pushed them into receivership, and they took everything and wiped them out, such that in 2010, just as in 1979, they were left standing on the side of the road with what they could put in a suitcase, thanks to another government attack.
You suggest the city was very, very unhelpful, and it was a political opportunism by a group called Vision Vancouver that ran the city from 2008 to 2018, I think you suggest, and that they did things like, purposefully having press conferences in suites that were subject to floods from suites above?
That was bizarre. The city turned out, so to back up one, in 2008, the project lost its financing. And the project lost its financing for two reasons. One is that the city had set it up in a weird way. And so it was difficult to finance in the first place. But the second is that the financier, which was a New York hedge fund called Fortress, basically ran out of money and refused to advance any more to the brothers. So suddenly, in the midst of a panic-stricken process of trying to build 12 square blocks of housing in 30 months, the brothers were without money and had to go to the city for help. So the city wound up in that way helping, and became the brothers' financier as well as its regulator, and then rode rough over the project for the duration until the brothers actually delivered. The weird thing was that during that period, they continued to be critical of because the project had wound up something of a political football. The city continued to be, the Vision Vancouver guys anyway, continued to criticize the project. And they said some terrible things about it, that it was badly done, that it was rushed, that it was undervalued, that the brothers were not competent. They put up no parking signs around the sales center. I mean, petty, weird things. But one of the things they did just after in a period after the Olympics, after the very successful Olympics, in which this athletes' village was delivered in lovely shape and on time, they actually had a press conference in a suite where there had been a toilet leak in the suite above, and there was water damage, of course, as there always is in these cases. And the city held a press conference saying, "Look at this place. And so, there's water leaking through these buildings." Well, in the effluent happens department, that's what happens when a toilet overflows. And it's weird that a banker who was hoping that its client would continue to make their payments, would hold a press conference to say, "My client is a scoundrel, and you ought not to buy his product." Like, why would you do only politics?
What was the orientation? What was the motivation?
It's a great question, and the only answer I can come up with, and I interviewed a million people, including the brothers and other contractors and other people, and I didn't get to as many people at the City of Vancouver as I would have liked, and the politicians whom I tried to contact, including then Mayor Gregor Robertson, were like, "Yeah, not available." But the only explanation for why they were abusive is a political one, because the issue had become political. Vision Vancouver had basically got elected on this issue because their predecessor and the guy who was running against them had been the person who had given the Maliks an additional loan in the middle of the 2008 crisis. And Vision said, "This is an Olympic boondoggle. This is a terrible thing. Our opponents are financially not just incompetent but reckless. We're here to clean it up, and we're people with real financial rigor and a heavy hand, and we're going to protect the taxpayer." And that was the narrative that they rode to success in the 2009 election, 2008, and then again in 2011, and again in 2014 by repeatedly coming back, smashing this project. In 2011, 2010, they pushed it into receivership. In 2013, just before the 14 election, they showed up and said, "Hey, folks, it's great. We've got it all sorted out. It didn't cost you a dime. We're at break even. It's all good. Let's have another election and celebrate our financial acumen." So it's not just that it seemed blatantly political. It's that there is no other explanation for why they would have taken such a heavy hand.
So just as a counterpoint, the Vancouver Sun wrote an article about your book and interviewed a vision counselor from 2008 to 2017, Jeff Megas, who said it was an all hands on deck to save the taxpayers from a staggering blow, which we succeeded in doing. People can make their own judgment, but the reality is the city had a huge problem in his hands. And then he says that his advice to booksellers was to put your book in the fiction section. What do you say to that, sir?
You missed the part where he said I was an excellent writer. He said he was trying to make the argument that the Maliks had gone out and hired someone to tell their story, which indeed that was how this book started. They had originally asked me if I would write it just on their behalf, but he's arguing, as he did during the time, that the city was subject to an economic risk, as indeed they were. They had an agreement with the International Olympic Committee to deliver the Olympic Village, and that was that was not just an agreement with the Olympic Committee that the Olympic Committee could sue them over after the fact. It would have been a national embarrassment had the city bungled this. So for sure, the city was exposed, and they were doubly exposed. well, the Maliks were more exposed, but the city came in behind the Maliks and said, yes, we see it's an obvious need for you to have the money to continue building this project on our behalf. So they did help arrange the financing. But this was an interesting bit. In the midst of that, as I said, the Maliks had trouble getting the financing because the city wouldn't give them the land. Under normal circumstances, if you're a developer, you get the land, you take the land to the bank, you say, I'll give you a mortgage on the land, you give me the money to do the development, everybody's happy. In this case, the city said, we're not going to give you the land until the Olympics are over. We're going to give you a lease. We're going to lease you the land until 2010. So you can take the lease to the bank. They took the lease to the bank, and the bank said, this is not equity, this is not security, this is a lease that erupts, that times out in 3 years. No, we won't lend you the money. So the brothers had no choice. Rather than using the financiers, the bankers that they always use for big projects, they wound up going to this New York hedge fund. And Fortress charged them prime plus 6%, which is, I don't know, you're old enough to remember household finance, maybe? Like, it's an extortionate rate. So the city, when Fortress ran out of money itself and refused to lend them any more money, the city said, okay, we'll take over. They went to one of the big 5 Canadian banks, borrowed the money at prime, and then continued to charge the brothers the extra 6 points. Again, loan sharking on behalf of the taxpayer. It was the kind of, yes, they were at points acting in a way that they contend was in defense of the taxpayer, and they were trying to control a situation in which they were going to be politically, socially, financially liable if they failed to keep their commitment to the International Olympic Committee. But they did so in a way that was consistently damaging to the brothers, and unnecessarily so. Just sort of a flagrant, what appears on the basis of the research, and Megs had not read the book when he made the point, but on the basis of the research, what they did was only marginally helpful, and in a lot of cases really damaging, and culminated at a point. And here's another illustration of what actually tipped this into the dumpster. In 2010, the deal was that the brothers would build the Olympic Village. The athletes would use it. When it was done, they would take the village back, do a retrofit so that it was in shape to be sold as condos, and then sell it as a condo development. And so you would hope that your banker was not holding press conferences saying that the product was substandard. But in any case, they were trying to sell it. It's 2010. Yeah, we're in the post-2008 period. The market's not great, but it's coming back everywhere else in Vancouver except in the Olympic Village. And the product's moving a bit slow. They were not making sales as quickly as they would have liked. So in the fall of 2010, they owed the city a $200 million loan payment, on which they came up $8 million short. So they owed the city 200, they gave the city 192, and that was the punctuation point that the city used to push them into receivership, push the project into receivership. Now, if you're the bank and I'm $8 short of a $200 mortgage payment, you're not going to take my house because you're a bank, right? You don't want my house. You want me to continue to make payments. And if you're a corporate lender and somebody's coming up short, but they have the product already built and ready to go, and the market is coming back, and you as a corporate lender don't want to take control of the project because you want to lend me more money at a higher rate for a longer period. There is no advantage for a banker in that moment to trigger a disaster for the client. the only explanation for why the city would have pushed the Maliks at that moment into receivership is that there was an election coming up. So they pushed the whole project off the cliff, and gave it to Ernst & Young. And in the next 3 years, Ernst & Young had a fire sale for everything and came out in the black 3 years later, which, minus their $5 to $10 million worth of fees. And again, at no point was the city at additional risk had they let the Maliks continue. The city had its security regardless. The timing of this and the drama of it was purely can only be tied again to the political agenda, the political timeline.
So did anyone make any money out of this? It sounds like the city didn't make any more money. The Maliks didn't make any more money. They lost the opportunity to make profit that they would have made. Sounds like the only people that made money was Ernst & Young, the receiver.
Ernst & Young did great, yeah. Everybody else also did great. Every contractor who was involved in the project all got paid, and they all got paid really well because it was the thing was all done on overtime in effect. And the city had a financial overseer who was in the building the whole while, saying, "Okay, you've got to pay all of your contractors before you get paid yourself." And I have friends who were big contractors to this project, and they said it was great because in normal circumstances in a project like this, you're the contractor in charge of sort of doing providing all of the foundations for all of the buildings, for example. You're going to get paid when the time comes. You send the bill, you tell them they've got 30 or 60 days, but the money comes when the money comes. But in this case, the money was coming in under a month. Like the city was saying, okay, these guys, regardless of how much they've marked their bill up, we're going to pay them. And so as long as the Maliks were in charge, everybody got paid. So the contractors and subs all made out like bandits. They did
after the receiver and the city took over. Did people still get paid, or did anyone lose out?
No, after the receiver took over, they ran the thing for another almost 3 years, and then they pushed it into bankruptcy. And they did so because there was a tax advantage to do so, and because it allowed them to stiff a bunch of creditors. They for example, left the Vancouver Sun on the hook for I think $250,000, which in the grand scheme on a $700 million project is a rounding error, less than a rounding error. But for the Vancouver Sun, which like all media these days is in trouble, that was a lot of money. And an ugly bit that occurred there as well. The city took the project from the brothers in 2010, pushed it into receivership in 2014, and at that point, all of the headlines in town, not all the headlines, but the headlines were in town were Olympic developer bankrupt. Well, no, the Olympic developer was out of the scene and had been for 3 years, and Ernst & Young doesn't care about the word bankruptcy being attached to its name because it's a bankruptcy trustee. But for the brothers, this was a terrible, it was a humiliation, and it was a double humiliation because it simply was not true. So yeah, some people lost money. Some people made big money. The city sold a bunch of suites. The city, through Ernst & Young, sold a bunch of suites to another developer that also got tax advantage because of the nature of the deal. So they made a bunch of money. And
the city or the second developer? The
second developer. and the city in 2013 produced late 2013, early 2014 produced a spreadsheet of an economic document, a financial document that showed that the city was had completely broken even on the project, that they'd done, that they got everything they wanted, and that they paid all their bills. Hallelujah. So having Jeff Meggs, for example, having said the city's on the hook for $1 billion, the city is at risk of being out $1 billion. Well, the total cost for the project at the end of the day was 690 million, and the city didn't cost the city a dime.
Didn't cost the city a dime to create
No.
a 80-acre, 1.5 million square foot athletes village that you're saying today is a big success and very popular community. I've dined there, and I've gone to people's houses there. It's a gorgeous community with an incredible, walking area along False Creek, I believe. It's amazing.
Yeah, this was it's a super gorgeous place, and the city was there picking up the hardware. It was celebrated in 2011 as the greenest complete community in the world. It was the first LEED Platinum community in North America, and the city was, at pains to receive the hardware celebrating that fact. It is a gorgeous neighborhood. And the city had been sitting on this property for many years beforehand, trying to decide what to do with it. They had all this property around on the south side of False Creek, which is really some of the nicest land in the world, the nicest urban land in the world.
But for a long time, it was really an eyesore, was it not?
Oh, beforehand, you mean? It was
beforehand. After Expo, beforehand.
It was the north side, which is the Expo land, got all cleaned up for Expo. And by cleaned up, they basically leveled it and put a bunch of temporary structures on. And in the whatever, almost 40 years since, Concord Pacific has built the north side, built a great part of 80% of the north side out. And that is all pretty gorgeous stuff. It's put Vancouver on an international map for its planning and architectural achievement, urban planning especially. The south side, the city still has a bunch of vacant land on the south side, and this was toxic swamp territory. This was lighted, but some of it heavy industrial. The first thing the brothers had to do when they took over this property was truck away 160,000 square meters of toxic soils, the bill for which they paid themselves. So this was not just unsightly. This was dangerous. It was leaking dangerous metals and whatnot into False Creek. This went from a real eyesore and a health hazard in the city of Vancouver to a spectacularly beautiful LEED Platinum neighborhood.
Without first Expo and then the Olympics, this area never would have been developed, I don't think. Anyway, let's take a break for some messages and come back. And I'm going to talk to our author, our guest, Richard Littlemore, about what the catalyst was for getting this incredible area of Vancouver developed. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Richard Littlemore. He is an author, a journalist, a speechwriter, and a consultant who specializes in issues including urban planning and development, academic affairs, sustainability, and climate change. His recent books include Building Community, Defining, Designing, Developing University, The Fight for Beauty, about a West Bank developer, and also a book about the climate change cover-up. For David Suzuki's foundation. So originally he was a newspaper reporter and an editor for the Ottawa Citizen and the Vancouver Sun. And he's also been on the board of Metro Vancouver, and he's a writer and advisor to governments at all three levels. He's a speechwriter, and he's a leading university. He's been a speechwriter to leading university presidents in both BC and Alberta. He lives and works and rides his bicycle, he says, a lot in Vancouver, British Columbia. And we're talking tonight about his recent book that is all about what happened to two brothers, the Maliks, and it's called City Builders, the Maliks, the Olympics, and a historic gift to the city of Vancouver. Richard, I wonder if I could ask you for some lessons learned. And the reason why I want to ask you is I was involved in a development, and since you were in Ottawa as well, you might be familiar with this, at Le Breton Flats, which is a 53-acre development, 53-acre area, not development, regrettably, in Ottawa, just about a kilometer and a half to the west of the Parliament buildings in Ottawa. Also, similarly, very environmentally challenged, with a fair amount of environmental soils that would have to be taken away. And it's been an attempt by the National Capital Commission to try to do something with it for 60 years, and nothing has happened, or very little has happened, other than the War Museum. And some people have suggested that it needs a catalyst like an expo or a Olympics or a hockey arena or something like that. And when I was in when I was in that position, working on that development, I was sent out to Vancouver to take a look at the development that you're talking about as a example of the catalyst that can take place. We also went to Edmonton to take a look at the arena and the Rogers Centre and how it took an area, a very depressed part of Edmonton, and made it what is now almost downtown Edmonton. We also went to Tampa and took a look at an old industrial warehouse and very degraded part of Tampa, and became almost the preeminent place in Tampa today with the catalyst of an arena. What's your sense as you've taken a look at what happened, both with Concord Pacific, as you mentioned, on the north side, as well as the Olympic Village? What does it take to redevelop an old derelict, environmentally damaged, derelict part of a city?
It's interesting to ask the catalyst question, because government tends to move slowly. And the more important, particularly in projects like this, the more important the piece of property that they're having to deal with, the more people are lining up to say, no, I want it my way, the more difficult it is to do anything at all. And so if you have, as we did, Falls Creek in the late 1970s, early 80s, Falls Creek was quite literally a toxic swamp. It was a terrible, terrible place. You wouldn't see a whale in Falls Creek under any circumstances, because no smart animal is going to swim into that water if he can help it. And so in coming up to in the early 80s, somebody popped their head up one day and said, it was a cabinet minister named Grace McCarthy, popped her head up and said, I know that we're having a bad economic run here, but why don't we just buy up all this land and hold an expo here? And the city went, oh my God, are you out of your mind? This would be an insane thing to do. Mike Harcourt, who later became the premier of the city, the mayor of the city, and then the premier of Vancouver, of British Columbia, fought it at every turn, said, no, we shouldn't be doing this. But the provincial government said, yeah, we're going to have this expo, this World Exposition, and we're going to help the city. We're going to help we're going to step in and assemble all this land, clean it up, have the expo, and then sell it to somebody to redevelop. And they did that, and they did it in fairly short order, and it's taken 30 years to develop it, but it's a remarkably gorgeous part of the world right now, and some of the highest real estate values in any urban neighborhood, certainly absolutely in any urban neighborhood of this size. The city had more land on the south side. It was also toxic and in terrible shape, and the city kept saying, we should do something about this, and people kept saying, yeah, but. And then come the threat of the 2010 Olympics, the city said, okay, we will take responsibility to build an Olympic Village on this location, and this will be the trigger. And they made the deal early in the aughts, I think 2003-ish, And then they dithered for almost 3 years as to what the development was going to look like exactly, such that by the time they actually put out the bid to say, yes, we're going to do it, and we have to do it quickly, they had only 30 months to build, as you said earlier, 1.5 million square feet of developed space. For comparative purposes, it takes more than 30 months to get a building permit for a single high-rise tower in Vancouver today. So to go from toxic soil,
that's fast in Toronto terms.
Same in Toronto?
No, I'm saying it's fast. 30 months would be wonderful.
Oh. So to imagine 30 months from there is nothing, there is an 160,000 square meter excavation of toxic soils, included in this timeline, to a finished community in 30 months is almost unbelievable in today's terms. But that was how close to the bone they got before they actually pulled the trigger on the project. And yes, this was absolutely a trigger, and it absolutely transformed the neighborhood. And I don't know, it's 30, probably 30 acres still vacant now beside that property that has sat. They use it as a surface parking lot for police cars next to it, because the city, again, is just sitting on the property doing nothing, regardless.
In the middle of a housing crisis.
Yeah. You do need these. You asked about lessons learned, and this is banal. This is a terrible thing to say, because I think, I fundamentally think that government is what we use to govern ourselves, to make stuff happen, and to make sure that the stuff that happens is not dangerous and depraved. So I personally think that government is a good thing, but a lesson learned for anybody who is in the development business is be really careful before you actually trust a government, because the government that you trust today may not be the government who you're dealing with tomorrow. There are, some recent examples of that immediately south of the border. Things can change, and they can change for the worse. And that was most certainly the situation that the Maliks ran into here, where they made an agreement with a bunch of people in an administration whom they trusted, and the people who took over afterwards did not do what their predecessors had promised.
And my experience would be similar in that in Ottawa with the NCC, the National Capital Commission, it really depended on how important the NCC was to the federal government, because it reports into the Ministry of Heritage and into the federal government. And surprisingly enough, whether the minister responsible actually had an interest in what was going on in Ottawa. And when there was a minister responsible for the NCC that was from Ottawa and had an interest in Ottawa, then things would get done. But when that minister responsible for heritage and the NCC was not from Ottawa and didn't really care much about Ottawa because they only come to visit for a couple of days a week, not nearly as much got done. So you had to have that political capital, the political champion involved. But I guess the question I was asking was also about the catalyst of something that is bigger than the norm, the Olympics, the Expo, et cetera. And maybe, Granville Island is another example, which was, I think, one of the very first developments in that whole area. And really, it was similarly a decrepit industrial wasteland that the government of Canada came in and really was the catalyst for creating what Granville Island is today. Is that not the fact?
Yes, and you get to another interesting complication in the Canadian panoply, which is overlapping jurisdictions. You have governments find lots of reasons not to move quickly, and three governments working together find more than 3 times as many reasons not to do anything. Granville Island was kind of interesting because there was some real brilliance. Government can do some brilliant stuff and tends to do so most often when no one's looking. and Granville Island again was kind of a toxic swamp, or it was a toxic industrial property, and nobody was. I don't think really in hindsight that most people away from False Creek were taking that very seriously at the time. They were looking at it as someplace that they never went. And so if the governments were talking about doing something down there, there wasn't there wasn't a lot of opposition. There weren't a lot of people there saying, no, we want to do it differently. So you had some people who went down and came up with a really creative kind of off the wall plan where you were going to develop like a little commercial, what amounts to a little commercial center in the midst of an industrial park. And you were going to preserve the industrial uses because they brought energy and life. But you were going to create this other thing. And everyone looked at it and went, yeah, that'll never work. Not everyone, because the planners, the urban planners at the time, were really very clever about it. But lots of people just went, it's far enough out of sight that it is out of our mind. And they just let it happen. So Granville Island became a catalyst for everything that has happened since on False Creek, I think, because against the odds, some interesting planners and thinkers went down there and said, hey, let's do this in an important part of the city and show that this kind of commercial and social activity against the waterfront is a really good idea. And so I think the trigger there was that they had this industrial land that they had to do something with. But it kind of became a trigger for everything else that has followed since whatever that was, late 70s.
So Granville Island, with federal government involvement, taking an old industrial area and building the farmers market and the art galleries and a festival, etc., was the catalyst to developing Granville Island, which was then the catalyst for Expo and developing the north end of False Creek. That was then the catalyst for taking industrial, derelict, environmentally challenged lands and the Olympics and the south side of False Creek. Am I right?
You are. It's been an unbelievable transformation. I'm an old guy. I went to high school in Chilliwack in the 70s. And when you came into Vancouver and drove over the Granville Street Bridge or the Cambie Street Bridge during the winter time or during any kind of a cloudy day, there were beehive burners. The creek was full of beehive burners that were burning off sawdust from the sawmills. And the creek looked like a 1960s Alfred Hitchcock set. You couldn't see anything. It was absolutely, a smog obscurity, and it smelled terrible. Such that when in the first residential developments right adjacent to Granville Island, a little bit east of Granville Island, the first houses that were built there were again in the 70s, and that was following an international conference on whether or not urban living was a good idea. The mayor of the day was Art Phillips, and his wife is Carol Taylor, who was a W5 person, like quite a famous media person, and later she wound up the finance minister in British Columbia. They bought one of the first condos on False Creek at a time when everyone was telling them to run away, because this was a smoky, awful, toxic place that was never going to be better. And now it is this exquisite inland waterway that, as I say, is among the most expensive urban land. It's certainly the most expensive urban land in Canada.
I think there's a lot that we can learn from the success in Vancouver of Granville Island, of False Creek, of the Expo, of the Olympics, and from your book, both in regards to how cities and governments can be a catalyst for good, and can also be a big problem, as you say, if you don't. You got to be careful about trusting government too far. You've also written another book, or co-authored another book, which I want to touch on, called "Building Community: Defining, Designing, Developing Better Communities." University is the example that you used. I want to take a break and come back and ask you, how do you build better communities? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're having an interesting conversation with Richard Littlemore. He is an author that's written a really interesting book about the Olympic Village in Vancouver, and a story about how, frankly, it sounds like the city of Vancouver really took advantage of and bankrupted, put in receivership first, and then bankrupted the developers that were there. They came away from it with a soured reputation, and the author suggests that wasn't the case. It was really the city that was making some mistake for political reasons. You've written or co-authored at least another book called "Building Community: Defining, Designing, Developing a University," and it talks about beautiful, livable, sustainable, restorative communities, a community model of sustainability that sets the highest standards for master planning, design, and development, etc. I got to ask you, sir, how do you build community and communities?
It's a trick, and it's a trick we know how to do. The planning community has been looking at this stuff for a long time, and they have come to a lot of sort of big macro solutions that are all about that speak in many cases to the usefulness of well-planned density, and proximity and green space and sustainable development. There are a whole bunch of not tropes, but planning practices which if you can line them up together, make it possible to build communities. One of the things that you need is political will. One of the things that you need is a place to build it. And some of the people who are doing really interesting work these days are universities or post-secondary institutions, which have been endowed with property that they were supposed to use at some point to keep them solvent. And because the government stopped giving universities money in the last 30 years or 30 years, universities have started to look for other ways to finance their operations. And one of the ways they've chosen to do it is by developing the land that they have. So you have University Properties Trust developing the University of British Columbia, around the University of British Columbia. You have Simon Fraser University developing University which is the community that we're talking about, adjacent to the SFU campus on Burnaby Mountain. You have a huge, really interesting project in Toronto that York University is doing, sort of filling around its campus, which is now has two subway lines running through it. So this suddenly very valuable or much more valuable property because of its not just its proximity but its convenience. So you have this opportunity to say, okay, we have a central thing, a university. We have a lot of people who want to be there. We have land that's available, and we have an opportunity to plan it in a good way. And what the University of British Columbia and Simon Fraser both understood and proved right away is that by developing an interesting community adjacent your campus, instead of being an ivory tower, the hell and gone away, where like an intellectual industrial park where people drop in during the day and then drive home as fast as possible, you can have a sort of U of T / McGill style intellectual community surrounded by a financial and social community that is really vibrant because of what's going on there. So you bring all of those good things together: the vibrancy of a commercial center, of an economic center, of an employer, and in the case of university, a bunch of kids who who bring all kinds of life and their parents' money.
So the university was an important catalyst. The land was a catalyst. Was transportation a part of the issue?
Transportation was interesting at both UBC and University. Burnaby Mountain SFU was established in 1963, and they chose that location because it was deemed to be central. If you get a map of the Lower Mainland and you say, okay, here's the middle, it's about where Burnaby Mountain is. But Burnaby Mountain, per its name, is a mountain, and there was nothing there. The reason it was available to build a university is because there was nothing else on the property at the time. So they built the university, and that's all there was until from the mid 60s, 1965 until 2000. So it was the second busiest transit destination in the region.
With buses.
With buses, yeah, with diesel buses climbing up that hill, except on 12 winter days when the snow makes it impassable. But it also was, nobody likes to talk about this, it was among universities, it was a suicide capital of the country, because in the wintertime, the clouds move in November and it is just dank or snowy for the next 3 or 4 months. And there was nothing to do. You had to get on a bus and go for 40 minutes to get a quart of milk until they decided to build the community there. So it was, this was a desperately needed project, and it has been a transformative one because now there's a grocery store and a liquor store and a little community where most of the people, not most, a statistical majority of the people who live in the community are associated with and or employed by the university.
And has transit improved?
Transit is still as good as it ever was. It's gotten a lot better because the TransLink organized a deal for the students and a U-Pass, and the U-Pass was so successful that they just charged everybody who was going to go to UBC or SFU. They just charged them amount of money for a U-Pass, for a bus pass, whether the kids used it or not. And the parking at UBC dropped by half during a period that the number of students doubled. So everybody said, "Hey, wait a minute! We've got this bus pass. Why don't we just take the bus to UBC instead of drive our cars?" And it was the same at SFU. So that was good. The thing that is going to be transformative at SFU, at University, on Burnaby Mountain, is a gondola, which sounds like a gondola. Really, don't they put those on ski hills? But the active word here is hill. You could put a gondola from the SkyTrain station to the top of Burnaby Mountain and cut travel time by more than half for everybody, and make it not free environmentally, but reduce the carbon load by a phenomenal amount. And the project pays for itself in less than 25 years.
A gondola, seriously?
Yeah, and it's the TransLink has approved it, and it's a couple of $100 million, which sounds like money, but a couple of $100 million these days will buy you maybe a kilometer of SkyTrain of subway line. Not in Toronto, where it's actually expensive, but you can get a kilometer of subway line or a SkyTrain line in Vancouver for that much money. You could get this whole project done for less than that, and free up like 50 or 60 buses to go to other parts of the region, and you would have a super sustainable, perfectly efficient service that runs in all weather as opposed to the buses. It's a remarkable solution that is so obvious that everybody, whenever you say to anybody, "Is this a good idea?" they all go, "Yeah." But then when comes time to pay for it, everybody says, "But gee, I'd sure like a couple of extra buses in my neighborhood first." So it'll happen in the next, probably, I would hope in the next 5 years. And once it happens, everybody around is going to go, wow, those people in Colombia, in Medellin, the people who've been doing this already, they were really onto something. This is a great, great people mover.
Richard Littlemore, thank you so much for telling us about your book, City Builders, the Malix, the Olympics, and a historic gift to the city of Vancouver, and also your book about University. I really appreciate it. We're going to take a final break, and I'm going to come back with a couple of my own thoughts on this topic because I do think that what Richard and his books have set forth is some catalysts and some lessons learned that, frankly, we haven't learned in Toronto and in Ottawa, and particularly in Mississauga. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with a couple of my own views on these topics. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to finish tonight with a couple of comments about what Richard Littlemore has really, I think, told us about the catalysts, because I don't think we've learned from Vancouver. And you think about Granville Island as one example. I don't think Harbourfront has had nearly the same sort of catalyst in Toronto that Granville Island has had on Vancouver, because we focused on that, the arts and culture aspect of Harbourfront, but we haven't really thought about, and developed the development aspects of what Granville Island was. And Harbourfront ends up being, just this nice little thing on the waterfront, but not a lot more. I have pointed out before the 20-acre parcel owned by Canada Lands in Mississauga on One Port Street. It has this 120,000 square foot beautiful old industrial warehouse that sticks out into the lake. That 25 cities in North America are thinking about waterfront redevelopment, waterfront entertainment. And we're not in Mississauga. Why isn't it the festival marketplace that Granville Island is? Why isn't it the festival marketplace, the retail marketplace that exists in North Vancouver on Lansdale Quay? It could and should be this incredible catalyst for redevelopment in Mississauga. And then you think about the Breton Flats, 53 acres in downtown Ottawa. It is a kilometer and a half from the Parliament buildings. It has been quoted by the Minister of the Environment, the prior Minister of the Environment, as a cesspool in the shadow of the Parliament buildings, but yet the federal government hasn't cleaned it up. And why not? And there have been proposals to move hockey arenas there. There's been proposals there was a war museum. There have been some festivals, but nothing that has actually ever happened because the federal government has been asking too much for the land and has not been willing to pay for the cleanup. And it should and could be a brand new downtown comparable to Rogers Center in Edmonton or Tampa Bay, the area around Tampa in Tampa, or Falls Creek in Vancouver. And in the nation's capital, it would be spectacular. And then you think about all that industrial land that is east of downtown Toronto, that is along the harbor and out into the Portlands. It's been an eyesore, an industrial eyesore for years, and underutilized, if not utilized almost at all. Could and should have been the kind of development. And only now, with the transit investment taking place, does it potentially become something that's going to be developed. Richard told us about University and SFU. The University of Toronto Mississauga campus sits in a 800-acre contiguous set of conservation areas and parklands. They're all separated into 4 different jurisdictions, but they're contiguous. And all the students have to live either in downtown Mississauga or in downtown Toronto. And somebody, myself, recommended a gondola to go from the Arundel subway, the Arundel GO train station to the University of Toronto Mississauga campus at one point in time. That development could be really incorporated into the city and make it a sustainable city residential development comparable to University, but nothing has happened. So why aren't we learning from the successes of Vancouver? Why aren't we learning from the successes that Richard has written books about? I don't know, because we could do a lot better in Mississauga, Toronto, and Ottawa if we only read his books, learned his lessons, and followed some of the footsteps. But at the same time, let's also listen to his comment about don't trust governments too much. You got to make sure that when developers get involved, that you're a little bit careful about that negotiation. Anyway, a couple of thoughts to end the show. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Vancouver, at saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.